Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
One thing my mother has always taught me is not to be like her, but to be better than her. And like Mary Ellen, I'm going to turn a negative situation into a positive situation. I'm here to tell you that life isn't perfect, and growing up, I always knew that I wanted to be more than what people expected me to be. I'm the oldest of my mother's 11 children, and I know everything there is to know about my mother. I'm her best friend, her therapist, her daughter, and some things I know about my mom, you guys would probably wish you didn't know about your mom because it's that in depth. Subconsciously, my mother taught me to be independent and responsible, and she also taught me that, I'm sorry, hold on, I'm shaking.
Okay. Take a deep breath.
And she also taught me that it's never too late to change. I will start off by telling you how I learned to be independent from my mother's dependency issues. Growing up, my mother had major dependency issues. She depended on my grandmother for the majority of her life. And during this time, my grandmother would make sure my mom's bills are paid. She would make sure that birthdays were done for my mother's children and that Christmas and holidays were good for all of us. When she passed away, this was a major hardship on my whole family. My mother lost her rock, the person she depended on, the person to do everything for her. My mother never really had the best taste in men either. She also depended on them financially, emotionally, and they weren't really good men to depend on. It even came down to my mother depending on me. Started off, I was 16. I got a part-time job in a bakery, and my mother started asking me for little things, money for diapers, milk, bread, stuff like that. Then she started asking me to pay rent at 16. So, because she needed more money, so I would pay rent because that's what she needed me to do. She asked me to do it, so I did it. It's my mom. Then I noticed our bills were starting not to get paid. Me and my siblings would be in school worrying, if we were going to come home to electric or water, if it was going to be off, if it was going to be on. So at that point, I decided to drop out of school and get a second job. And I helped my mom pay the bills just to make sure, my siblings and I would be okay. So because my mother depended on everybody, me, her boyfriends, my grandmother, it taught me to be independent and not to depend on them because they might not always be there. Now I'm going to explain how I learned to be responsible due to my mother's irresponsibility. Because my mother depended on my grandmother, myself, and her boyfriend, she had no sense of responsibility, obviously. She would never pay her rent on time, and we were always moving from home to home, from one friend to another, from one family member to another. Her utility bills and services would get shut off, and she would just put it in one of our names, my name, my sister's name, just to get it turned back on so we would have some type of services. Out of her 11 children, my mother did not raise any of them from birth to childhood. Growing up, dealing with my mother's irresponsibilities, it taught me how important it is to be responsible. So yeah, there are times I wish I could buy a new wardrobe or get my tattoo, but I know I have to pay my rent first, pay my bills, because that's part of being a responsible, independent adult. And finally, I would like to explain how my mother taught me it is never too late to change. My mother is sick. She has an illness that is incurable. As children, my siblings and I would tell my mom, please go see a doctor, please go get help. Oh, you kids are so dramatic, there's something wrong with me, I don't need help, blah, blah, blah. Hear it every day. Her sickness caused her not to think properly. It impaired her judgment. It caused her not to pay her bills, to have her daughter pay her bills, to have her teenage daughter pay rent, to choose men that were physically and emotionally abusive to her and to her children. My mother's disease is alcoholism. She would drink 2/5 of vodka a night. On January 6, 2010, my mother was admitted into a hospital. At this point, she was homeless. Her younger children were scattered amongst different family members, different friends, including myself. When I arrived to the hospital, my mother asked me not to be upset when she reveals to me why she is there. and I told her I couldn't promise her anything because nothing shocked me with my mother. She revealed to me that she was 5 months pregnant and she had just found out. She also revealed to me that she would be released tomorrow from the hospital because it was just a urinary tract infection. My reaction to my mother's irresponsibility and finding out that she was pregnant with her 11th child and homeless left me in complete anger. I told her that I would file for legal custody of my siblings that were living with me, and I told her I loved her, and I left the hospital. The next day, I felt bad for leaving my mom in the hospital on a bad note. You know, she's in the hospital and I'm leaving her, telling her I'm going to take her kids from her. So then I called her cell phone, went straight to voicemail, no answer. Called the hospital. They made me aware that my mother was transferred to the critical care unit and that she was unable to talk and to come to the hospital as soon as possible. When I arrived to the hospital, I was informed that my mom was in a deep coma. Her condition was unstable, and they were still trying to diagnose what it was that was wrong with her. At this time, when she went into a deep coma, her body was going into shock, so they had to do an emergency delivery on my baby brother, who was also in critical condition and less than 1 pound. The doctor made it known to me that they are not confident in her survival as she was diagnosed with sepsis, and I should start to think about future arrangements for my siblings. About a week and a half went by. My brother and my mom were still fighting for their lives. I went to the hospital sunrise to sunset. Being the glue holding everything together, making sure my siblings were okay, make sure everybody was where they needed to be, it was really hard. I thought to myself, when she recovers from this, I'm going to make sure she never puts my siblings through this again, because it was a lot. So I took a picture of her in her coma, and I took a picture of my baby brother fighting for his life on a ventilator, under a pound. He was like the size of my hand. Almost 2 weeks after she first, was admitted into the hospital, I walked into my mother's room, and there she was, sitting there, awake. Doctor said it's a miracle that she's alive. They don't know how she did it. The first thing I did was hug my mother and told her I loved her, and I showed her these pictures. And from that day on, she promised me that she would never drink again, and she would never put us through that again. That is how my mother taught me it is never too late to change. I have to roll. Just gonna add on to my time.
That's okay.
After a year of, I got my job. I was content with my job. I was happy with my job. So seeing that my mother could change and go from being a ridiculous alcoholic, I knew I could change and I could come back to school. If she could do it, I could do it. So in conclusion, my mother is far from perfect, but seeing her lifestyle impacted my life tremendously. She subconsciously taught me not to depend on anybody because they might not be there, and to be independent and responsible. She also taught me what's best for your children might not be best for you by admitting that her children are better off in somebody else's care instead of her own. And that must take an incredible amount of strength to admit, because I know I would never admit that my son belongs to somebody else instead of me. She made the choice to let the woman adopt my younger brother, who's now 2 years old. She couldn't have children. She gives him his undivided attention, and she stays in contact with us. My mother has custody of my 4-year-old brother, and I have custody of my 13 and 14-year-old sister and brother. My mother did change her ways, and I'm very proud to call her my mother despite my hardships growing up. The hardships I endured molded me into the person I am today. They say you learn from your mistakes, but you could also learn from others' mistakes. Like I said, one thing my mother taught me was not to be like me, but to be better than me. And I lived by that statement all of my life. I chose to make a negative situation into a positive situation. I chose to live better because I did not want to become a statistic, being, from a broken home with a mother who was an alcoholic and didn't do much. I grew up not allowing anybody to feel sorry for me or my siblings because we turned a tough situation and we made the best of it. Because sometimes in life, you have to play the cards you were dealt. That is it.